Well, we have success. Various things were tried, various solvents, various heating, various other things. In the end, we were down to hammer and punch. As a result, the retaining ring's not quite as pretty on one of those slots as it used to be, but we will cut some new slots with a Dremel and a touch of paint. No one will be any the wiser. You can't see this part inside the camera once it's assembled. Right, back we go. Now I've got to deal with this oily mess. It'll be fun cleaning that lens. So it's got fungus on there to deal with anyway, so won't be too bad. Get our retaining ring off. Nothing to indicate why it should have been stuck there so firmly, just to make life awkward, I think. And the shutter lifts off the front. Not much to speak of with this front cover. Part of the shutter cocking mechanism here not much travel involved in that, and a wee return spring. Apart from that, nothing else to speak of there. For the shutter, what do we have? I believe this lever is cocked by the film advance, and this should be the shutter release. And if the blades worked before, they probably wouldn't now with all the oil floating around. As it happens, they didn't work before. The shutter and the diaphragm on these cameras is just two blades. It makes a slot, which is a little bit ugly, but it functions. So the diaphragm's all right there actually. I'm not even seeing any oil on the blades. It hasn't worked its way down yet. That looks good. So to find our way into this camera, this shutter, let's start at the back. Make a little bit of space, gather another container. First I want to take this lever off. This thing here is a spring. The spring is a return spring for this lever. It also acts against that post. That I can see is screw was locked with a bit of lacquer. I'll unhook that spring, lift that component off. You can see the spring there. What's next? Here we've got a little brass shim that would have been used in the factory to set the distance of the shutter from the camera body, most likely. Or it may just have been a standard size for all of them, just to give clearance. Looking at the back of this ring, this is the diaphragm setting ring here. It acts on this boss here on that lever. You can see as it swings in and out, it controls the size of the diaphragm hole. So we've got 3 screws. Around the centre. I'll lift them off. One screw here that serves as a stop for the spring. It also serves as the location pin for the shutter in the housing. Drop down there out of the way, is it? Let's get it back out. That ring should come off. Note the flash wire runs through that slot. It has to hook over this lever here. Not much else to show there. This spring has come loose. That spring sits in that slot there. It acts against those little detents there to provide click stops for the aperture. So that can come off. I think we can disassemble the shutter from the front. So we'll start with removing the lens cap. I'm looking to see how the focus ring is attached to the lens, and I can't see any obvious method of attachment there. So I will start by removing the focus scale band, because there's 2 screws there, and hope to find screws underneath it holding that scale to the front lens group. We shall see. If not, it'll be a bit of a mystery. Okay, so what do we see here? There's a single screw here, there and there. So we've got our 3 screws. That's what I expected to find. I'm glad there weren't any surprises. Just back those off. Sometimes screws doing this job are fit into a little recess and they have to come all the way out. Other times they don't need much loosening at all, and that one didn't. You can see the cutout here in that ring. That's to presumably to stop it. Yeah, there's a tab here, so that allows the focus ring to only move through an arc. Back to the shutter. So first unscrew the front element, pop that to one side. Now here we have the centre group, and that may or may not be stuck very strongly. Time to find out. Let's see what tools I've got to do that. There's 2 holes in there which will take a tool. I'll try this one first. Yep. It was hard. Normally things like that are not exceptionally tight. They don't need to be. So it took no great force to move. Now we're down to the shutter body itself. What do we see here? So here's the retaining ring. That'll hold the front ring on, probably the other rings behind it. This little piece here is a spring, and it looks like it forms a detent for, in this case, the shutter speed ring. And I think I need, I'll see if that's going to move. It is. I should be using a wooden stick for this because a sharp tool can easily make a mess. I'll just be extra careful, and if I do anything I shouldn't, I won't tell you anyway. So the retaining ring from the front, that plate off, the shutter speed setting ring, the cam here controls the shutter speeds, another one will control the B setting. Now we're down to the shutter itself, and I want to take this ring out. That'll be held in, there's a spring here which holds that in place, so we'll unhook that. Nothing else. That's the shutter release really, that controls the shutter, it closes down the shutter before the mirror comes up, and then allows the shutter to fire after that. that little lever needs to come out, and before I do anything else rash, I am just going to take a photo of that for my own purposes so that I know where everything came from. I'm sure everyone has their favourite go-to camera that they use for recording things like this, and I use this old Canon A610, and what I'm really wanting to do is just take note of the positions of springs before I disassemble anything. And that of course is so that it's not a guessing game when I go to reassemble it. I wasn't able to find any service information for this camera. Alright, this one. Now when any of the spring goes there, and the other, that was well wrapped up. It came as a bit of a surprise. We'll have that lever off. The retard gear train is this piece here. In this camera it's held with two screws, this bright screw here and a small black screw down in here. We'll start with him. Retard gear trains are often awkward to wriggle out because they're sprung loaded levers at either end, and they often inconveniently hook themselves behind things when you're trying to move them. Now this one here is busy trying to fall apart, I can see. I'll be very careful about getting that one out. The screw at this end, as well as holding it to the mechanism plate, also holds the thing together, so it's awkward. Now will it come out through there? Looks like it should. Yes, it's making noises like it will. Yes. Okay, that's awkward. It's a very compact shutter case. Normally there's a little bit more room to manoeuvre things like that. Here's the shutter release lever there, so that when the shutter's cocked, this part will trigger it and allow it to run down. The shutter blades are not closing there at all. What else do I need to remove? The flash sink. This piece makes the contact. It's got a spring under it. There's our contact, and there's a little standoff that it rides on. It's got a collar at the top. This piece runs on that collar. Put those pieces to one side. It spring's unusual. It's a sort of a coppery colour. It might be a bronze, or it might just be the plating. I'll remove these levers. One of those at least is the B lever. It sets the shutter on B. That came out. That was very unusual the way that unscrewed. I think it's come up with more than one piece. So what do we got? Yeah, we've got the main lever there with its spring. There's the B lever, and there's the spring, the screw. Now that was a bit sticky on there. There might be a bit of corrosion. They were not moving as freely as they should have done. And the last thing I want to take out of the case before I split it and get into the blades is the flash sink. And the flash sink is held in with a screw from the outside with a plastic insulating washer, and on the inside of the case there should also be a plastic insulator. It's a clear piece of plastic, and that's to stop that from actually shorting against the case. I'll get a picture of this so I've got it for my records. Back in a minute. That was a call from Mr. Nobody. It would have been the Indian tech support scammers. We get them about 3 times a week. If you're not the first to answer the phone when they dial out multiple numbers, you just get a dead line when you pick it up. And that's what I had that time. Alright, so remove that screw. There's our screw of the insulating bush. Here's our plastic insulator I told you about on the inside of the case. And there is the flash wire poked through the case. The contact is just a little threaded and flat piece of metal there, like a nut that the screw runs right through to. We'll pop that to one side. That brings us down to not an awful lot, so no more needs to come off there to open up that case, I believe. So 3 screws at the back of the shutter. That was quite stuff. 3 black screws here. They're a little bit scarred. They're missing a little bit of their black finish. But to be honest, I can't tell you whether that was just clumsy assembly work or whether it's been serviced and it was clumsy servicing work. Alright, well that's our diaphragm mechanism. That's just two blades. I will pull that apart and clean it, but first I want to look at the shutter. Here's our shutter blades, and I can see that they look very oily. Yeah, see, that should return. That's very, very, very stiff. That should be nice and free. So that's just a sign of how much stickiness is here. Part of that will be the blades. Here I take a picture so I know which blade went in first and how they were oriented, and I always do that when I've got a shutter apart, just so that if there's an unusual shaped blade with a cutout to allow for some protrusion, I'll know where it went. Let's get that. Alright, that's it. So these blades, blade number 5, blade number 4, these blades are all identical. 3, 2 and 1. Now this ring, that feels much freer now, returns under spring tension quite snappily, which tells me that the main reason that shutter was stiff was the oil on those blades was sticking things together. So I want to remove this ring, this control ring from the bottom of the shutter, and clean it out. So I'm checking to see what I need to know. There's a return spring here, its job is to return that ring and so close up the shutter blades. This is a stop. It stops you from being able to move that ring all the way around this direction, which we want to do, because this cutout here, here, and here, we need to move that ring around so that we can lift it off past these bosses. So, remove this stop. That's reluctant. Let's put this on something solid. That's better. Put that to one side. Now we should be able to rotate the ring round far enough to lift it out past those bosses, just to that point. That's all we need. Will it do it? It's got a return spring here which is binding things up. Let's see if I can oh, it's quite stiff. See if I can remove that return spring. There it is. I'm going to unhook it. It's unhooked. It's a very fine spring. Got to take great care not to lose that. Now I can rotate the ring far enough to remove it from the shutter housing. I'm looking closely at this to see if there's any obvious problem, any corrosion, any thick grease, nothing like that. It looks relatively clean. It'll be clean now and then put back together. There's not much left in here now, bar the little cocking levers here. And I know from experience getting those reassembled is pretty tricky. It's very much like a Prontor shutter in that regard, and so I'm not going to disassemble those. I'm just going to clean those carefully, perhaps give them a dot of lubrication, and then put it back together. So far so good.